Steve Guttenberg, Beverly D'Angelo, Daryl Hannah, Jennifer Tilly, Peter O'Toole, a whole host of recognizable bit part players in support, and at the helm, a hotshot director who already had an Academy Award nomination, making his debut in the Hollywood system. With a decent-sized budget and a return to the filmmaker's Irish homeland for the production, it seemed like High Spirits could really shake things up. But the film flopped and nobody seems to talk about it anymore. It's almost as if it disappeared in a puff of smoke. So how did a comedy with this much talent powering it end up haunting the VHS bargain bin rather than the box office? By the late 1980s, Neil Jordan's career was very much on the rise. He'd already been Oscar nominated for Mona Lisa, which proved he could combine genuine heart with gritty realism. The film established Bob Hoskins in Hollywood and meant that the industry was eagerly anticipating the director's next move. And that move soon became clear. He would make High Spirits to be released by US studio Columbia through their TriStar Pictures brand, a film seen as a chance for Jordan to explore Irish ghostly folklore in a mainstream comedy. It was a fascinating move. The cast soon filled out pretty impressively. Peter O'Toole, one of Britain's greatest actors, was on board. Steve Guttenberg, whose golden run in the 80s had covered hits like Police Academy, Cocoon and Three Men and a Baby, and Beverly D'Angelo, fresh off the Vacation movies, added recognizable modern headline stars. Add in a post-splash Daryl Hannah and a young Liam Neeson as ghostly love interests, along with the likes of Jennifer Tilly and Peter Gallagher, and respected British and Irish actors Liz Smith and Ray McAnally. It was a really interesting mix, and one of the most stacked comedy casts of the decade. In November of 1987, this stellar group decamped to County Limerick to deliver on that promise. The tale they were telling centered around the failing Castle Plunkett Hotel, which an American businessman wants to move to Malibu. In a last-ditch attempt to save the place, it is given a new lease of life when it's promoted as being haunted. But when a busload of American tourists arrive, the staff attempt to give them a haunted experience, as a couple of real-life ghosts turn up too. But can love conquer all, and will they manage to survive Halloween night? It was an intriguing concept backed up by solid players in front of and behind the camera. But soon, the interference from executives began. Jordan's concept was a dark, satirical movie, closer in tone to his film The Company of Wolves than an Irish Ghostbusters, but the studio wanted something lighter, broader, and more mainstream Hollywood. Tensions ran throughout production, but they spilled over completely once it got to the edit. Test screenings of the director's first cut of the film did not go well, and executives behind the film shut him out of the process as changes were made in response. In Jordan's own words, after he was excommunicated from High Spirits, they ended up making a bland comedy out of what was meant to be a biting satire. The film would eventually appear on screens in this mangled form on November 18, 1988. Reviews were far from kind. Time Out called it a complete turkey, and the Boston Globe stated it isn't super, it isn't natural, it isn't high, and it isn't spirited. While the Washington Post simply noted writer-director Neil Jordan shows no knack for comedy. At best, it was seen as a silly sex comedy carried by the chemistry between the talent within it, but nothing more. It felt like what could have potentially been something memorable and unique had been turned into just another comedy. It didn't fare much better with audiences, landing at number 5 on opening weekend. High Spirits was overshadowed by the animation battle between Don Bluth's studio and Disney, although in saying that, it couldn't even do better than Ernest Saves Christmas, and it would only last a few more weeks in theaters. High Spirits ended up with a North American total of $8.5 million, barely more than half of its $15 million budget. And though it would be released across the world in the coming months, it would end up as little more than filler on cable TV in the years that followed. Jordan would later disown the film, never actually taking the time to watch the full finished cut of a movie that he felt, with some justification, had been snatched away from him. High Spirits would eventually be largely scrubbed from the director's Hollywood story. After another Tinseltown failure, the 1989 comedy We're No Angels starring Robert De Niro and Sean Penn, he went back to basics with The Crying Game in 1982, a low-budget British crime thriller. It would make such an impact that it earned more than $70 million worldwide on a $2 million budget, and would be nominated for numerous Academy Awards, with Jordan taking home Best Original Screenplay at the 1993 ceremony. 2 years later, he was ready to tackle Hollywood again, but this time did it with more success. Interview with the Vampire, an adaptation of Anne Rice's novel featuring a star-studded cast, made over $200 million in cinemas in November 1994. A film that couldn't have covered the supernatural in a more starkly different way to High Spirits, it finally proved Jordan could be taken seriously in Hollywood. The director would be reflective in later years on the experience of making High Spirits. The whole thing was compromised and became a monster. The studio took over the editing. It was a painful experience because as a director, you're not being allowed to finish your job. Over-ambition was to blame, the ambition of everybody to get into Hollywood. It would, however, teach him how to manage the relationship with studios and producers in his major films going forward. Though High Spirits might not have ended up as the movie Jordan wanted to make, and it would be interesting to see his cut, I definitely think it still has its charms, though it's inevitably a bit frayed round the edges given its difficult journey to the screen. The quality of the talent involved means this farce is far from a total waste of time. Messy, sure, inconsequential maybe, and many of those involved might look back on it with anger, but like at least some of the other movies we've covered tonight, High Spirits was a unique enough prospect to deserve a bit more of an afterlife following its release.